Hello! I'm Elaine, and I'm a tour guide in the French Quarter. I do ghost tours. And I am not going to tell you the stories that I tell on my tour, because you gotta pay for those. But if you want to hear some interesting things that have happened to me while I'm leading random drunk people around the French Quarter, I got you. I think I mentioned somewhere along the way that I haven't done a lot of family-friendly tours in a while, and I'm happy about that. But one time that I know I will be called back in to do family-friendly tours again is once we start getting school groups again. Because, yeah, we get a good number of school groups on ghost tours, especially us because we advertise ourselves as historically accurate. And school groups, they can be fine. Like, sometimes they're just a little bit chaotic. They always start about 10 to 15 minutes late. It does not matter when they say they're going to start, they're always going to be late. They often, even though we are very clear with how it's going to work, don't seem to understand that they're going to have to break into different groups, which has on a number of occasions meant we started 30 minutes late while we basically talked to the chaperones being like, no, we need under 28 people with each guide, and yes, there needs to be a chaperone with every single guide. It is not our job to chaperone these kids. But I have a couple that stand out in my memory very clearly. One was a tour that somehow there were like 5 of us dividing this school group. It was a buttload of kids. They were a band. I don't know why, but we get a lot of high school bands. And this particular one was high school, so ranging from 9th grade up to 12th grade. And my group was the smallest of the groups. I somehow ended up with the least number of kids, but I also only ended up with one chaperone. And I'm sitting here like, well, this will be fine. One chaperone. And I keep trying to tell the lady it might be best if you walk in the back to keep an eye on the kids. And she's walking up front with me chatting, and I'm like, don't you want to keep an eye on the kids? Keep an eye on the kids. Why aren't you keeping an eye on the kids? And then in the middle of the last stop, she just vanishes. And I'm telling a story, so at first I don't notice, and then I look up and I'm like, oh God, I am alone in the French Quarter with 17 high school students. I'm about to get my ass sued. So I very quickly finished that story, and I'm like, okay, we need to get y'all back to your chaperones immediately. And one of the girls steps up and is like, oh yeah, Miss, insert name of chaperone here, went off to take one of the boys to go pee because he couldn't wait any longer. And I'm like, so I am the only adult on record here. And she's like, yeah, but I'm a 12th grader, so I'm sort of vaguely in charge. And I'm like, cool. And then I got them back to the chaperones immediately. There was also a lovely night that this particular school group did not feel like booking a private group, which school groups are always private groups. No, this one just booked 12 tickets on my otherwise normal public tour. And I felt really bad for the other people in that group because there were some older ladies who were super excited to be on this tour. They mentioned they'd been on a ghost tour in New Orleans a year ago and they absolutely loved it. And part of the reason they came back to New Orleans was for this. And then they were having to deal with middle school students. But the big problem was they showed up with one chaperone, and considering there were, only 11 kids, that didn't seem like a problem at the time. I was just like, okay, that's an unusual thing, but 10 to 1, 11 to 1, not the end of the world. We can deal with this. And the chaperone came up and asked me right away, is it okay if they eat dinner during one of the stops? I'm like, yeah, of course, as long as they're not disruptive, I don't care. What I did not know was this was not like a bagged lunch that they were ready to eat. No, it seems the other 2 chaperones that were supposed to be with the group were putting in their orders at the restaurant. So in the middle of the second stop, they show up and are standing right next to me going, okay, who had the half a muffalata with fries? Who had the shrimp po' boy? And mind you, I am literally in the middle of a story. And finally, after I notice what they're doing, I pause and do y'all want me to wait until you're done passing out food?
Waiting for you, but okay.
And I say it in that tone in the hopes that they'll understand that this is not appropriate. And she's like, no, you can continue. And as they hand out food, the groups, the little high school and middle school students, whichever they were, grab their food and wander off to the side to eat, sitting around chatting as if they're in the lunchroom. And I'm sitting here like, why the hell am I doing this? Meanwhile, I've lost all the adults that paid for this tour, and I'm left with just this school group. And when they finish eating is about the time that I finish that story, and I'm looking around like, do I have to finish this tour? What the hell is going on? And I go to take us to the next stop, and the chaperone comes up to me and is like, hey, so could we make the next stop the last stop? We're sort of like running short on time. And I'm like, well, considering y'all ran off the rest of my guests, yes, we can. And I mentioned that the next one is generally the one that people want anyway. And he's like, oh, and could you make it not very scary? And I'm like, no. If you want me to do a completely different last stop, I can take you elsewhere, but the next stop is the most violent one on this tour. And he's like, okay, well, just keep it short. And about halfway through that stop, he literally just interrupts me like, okay, we're going back to the bus, kids. And I'm like, wow, glad everybody else left. But there was also a lovely tour. This has gotten too long. I'm going to make this 2 videos. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thank you for listening.